Today on Earth Focus, America's Rivers. Jamie Redford and Mark Decena document the challenges facing the Colorado River in their new film, Watershed. And Alexandra Cousteau on the struggle to restore the health of the Potomac, a river once called a national disgrace. Coming up on Earth Focus.
All over the world, the development of rivers has always been part of man's progress. His conquest of rivers and his improvement of them for his own use, demonstrated by the rivers of our own West. The Colorado River is an outstanding example of a river which man has put to his own use. From its source in the Rocky Mountains, the Colorado flows south through Utah and Arizona. Much of this region is dry wasteland, and the river itself is normally shallow and of no use for navigation. Yet man has made this river of great value. We have seen examples of the many ways in which man has put rivers to work for his own benefit. The development of the Pacific Slope is part of the story of man and his use of rivers in our changing world.
We aren't doing a very good job at managing our water.
If we use too much, it's a formula that's going to lead to disaster.
It is said that nothing defines a region more than a body of water. This is particularly true in the American West. The Colorado River and the tributaries that make up her basin shaped the spirit of her settlers. El Rio Colorado, the river colored red from the land she flows through, made this dry land not only livable, but irresistible to settlement. Even still, her famed early explorer, John Wesley Powell, warned that combining arid land with civilization would eventually lead to a crisis. The relentless march towards progress led to the 1922 Colorado River Compact and other agreements among 7 American and 2 Mexican states to divvy up the water. They transformed one of the world's wildest rivers, capable of creating Grand Canyons and inland seas, into the most dammed, dibbed, and diverted river basin in the world. A machine supporting the needs of 30 million people. Agriculture, industry, urban growth, mining, energy production claw for their share. So much so that the mighty Colorado River of today rarely, if ever, reaches her delta in the Gulf of California. With populations in the region expected to reach 50 million by 2050, temperatures rising and precipitation patterns becoming more erratic, demand will outpace supply unless we embrace a new water ethic. One that questions not only how we use water, but how it affects the world around us.
Watershed is a film that is really exploring a region of the southwest of America, the Colorado River Plateau. And it's looking at everything that relies on the flow of that river. Everything from urban water use to farming, to energy sources, to recreation. And what we do know is that there is an approaching shortage coming. This film is really sort of, I would say it's the opening salvo on creating a greater awareness of this approaching shortage, and most importantly, demonstrating that there are some hopeful solutions.
I had the good fortune of going down the Colorado River in 2008. This is before I knew anything about the project, and I noticed on the river, every night you had to pull your boats up and tie them really tight. And I said, why do we have to do that? You know, the river is just the river. Why does it change at night? And came to realize that Las Vegas, the lights come on, they release more water throughout the river. So I got a sense that wait a second, so this is a man-made machine, this incredible canyon that we're in. And then I think I realized shortly after that that the water in the river does not reach its end. And there was a certain amount of outrage about that. The mighty Colorado River does not reach its end. It was a story that I needed to tell.
To prevent disputes over water rights, the 1922 Colorado River Compact divvied up the river. The problem was allocations were based on an unusually wet period. Average river flows were much less than assumed, so the compact promised more water than the river could deliver. Due to climate change, the Bureau of Reclamation projects even greater shortages by 2050. With that, the likelihood of even greater disputes.
Originally, there were boats, big boats, coming up to Yuma from the Gulf. There were a lot of cottonwoods and willows, wildlife like dolphins, turtles, jaguar. And there were so many birds that they were like clouds in the sky. The magnificence of the delta when it had all this water. I cannot imagine how that would have looked. It's very big. In the 60s, the dams were built in the US, so there was water here until the first dam was built. And then they built the other dams, and at the end, the delta stopped receiving water as usual.
I believe that we are in a period of climate change. Other people say we're just in a sustained period of aridity, but one thing we do know is there is not as much water in the Southwest right now as there has been historically. And you can hear that from the scientists, and you can also hear it from Navajo elders who tell stories that are passed down generation to generation. And you put that on top of the increased impact of population, then it's a double whammy.
30, 40 years from now, I think it could be bleak. I mean, there are things that could be done. The characters in the film do show us positive examples. I mean, I laughed with Jamie and the other producers of the show because they said, we want you to do a film on water, but we want it to be a positive film. And I first signed up for that. I was like, sure, no problem. And I realized how difficult that is.
You know, we're not out to sort of alarm or criticize. I think we're in a period right now where there's been a lot of that. And I think there's room for that, and it's necessary. But this particular film is more interested in demonstrating inspiration and solutions.
Navajos believe all things are connected.
In this human experience, isn't it worth imagining that we are actually in harmony with all the creatures, that we are actually all one thing, that we're not just here to have dominion over everything, and that's all here to serve us?
This whole notion of the American dream, there really isn't water conservation or, you know, any type of environmental anything.
If we have the ability to influence at all our future in regards to the climate, then we need to be taking those steps and ensuring that we're doing the proper thing.
You know, I'm not sure to what degree we're causing this climate change or anything. It's obviously happening. It's our responsibility to leave this stuff to future generations. I don't think the legacy we want to leave is a planet that is so far gone that it can't be recaptured at that time.
This land ultimately belongs to the earth. I think we're caretakers.
3 years ago, we had a conference at the Sundance Resort around the issue of the Colorado River Plateau and the approaching shortage. And we had a huge roundtable conference for 2 days in which we brought in all the stakeholders, everyone from energy and agriculture, farmers, urban use planning, to sit and talk about what the issues were around that table. And it was a unanimous feeling with the group that the first thing that had to happen was there needed to be a basic awareness about the issue. You can't really change things if people aren't aware of what the issue is. So we emerged from that with this notion of creating a film that would do that. So the film, in a sense, is a tool. It's just not, we're not going to be able to live the way we did in the 20th century in the West. It's simple. I mean, you know, and there's no reason to consider that alarmist or negative. It's a reality, and you can approach it with creativity, like these folks have.
I guess the way James Ranch considers our water consumption is to improve upon the resource that's delivered to us. After it flows through the systems of ponds and irrigation ditches and out into the fields and the filtration that happens there, when it goes back into the river, it's just like soup.
So we create the life by meandering the water down through our ponds and down through this ground that hadn't been fertilized in 16 years. And we grow all these bugs that cause the fish to do well.
It's so full of life, and there's watercress in the waterways, and bugs and fish, and God, it's gorgeous.
One of the questions that's often asked me is, what caused us to start moving the cows on a regular basis? Our whole deal is just to copy nature.
We never regraze in less than 30 days. A grass plant wants to have an equilibrium between what's above the ground and what's below the ground. And so it needs that rest to grow that above ground mass so that the underground mass is growing a lot of roots, so that when those cows come in and they eat that top part of the grass off, the shedding of those roots builds topsoil. We're balancing that. We're also balancing it with when this pasture needs to be watered. You know, all the water that goes on to this field is filtered through beautiful ground, you know, the way nature intended it. Healthy grass, healthy soil, healthy water. So we're grass farmers and we're soil builders.
Overall goal of the film is to connect the river to the sea again. The greatest river in the West doesn't reach its end right now. I personally am going to feel much better knowing that that river does reach the sea.
John Wesley Powell, the first explorer of the Colorado River Basin, was convinced of one thing, that the growth of civilization be contingent on the size and health of its watersheds. With the Colorado River no longer reaching her delta and greater demand looming, perhaps Powell was right. By reshaping the historical compacts that burden us, we can explore new frontiers of cooperation, conservation, and reuse. We can change how we produce food, create energy, and grow our cities to restore a mighty river's connection to the sea. All the while renewing our appreciation for a resource we have most certainly taken for granted.
While growing demand for water has led the Colorado River to run dry before reaching its natural end, on the East Coast, the Potomac faces a different set of challenges. Alexandra Cousteau, granddaughter of marine explorer Jacques-Yves Cousteau, documents the efforts to restore the Potomac in her film, Our Nation's River.
We are disconnected, we are fragmented, and we have lost touch. As I travel the world, I have discovered these common themes in the way we all look at water. Even in our own backyards, we no longer recognize what a healthy water system needs to survive. You know, we've traveled all over North America looking at this very problem, community after community, river system after river system. And at first, you're overwhelmed by all the issues, over-allocation, pollution, all these things that are occurring. But the more I experienced these places, the people that are working on these issues, the more I realized that actually the problem is a very simple equation. We all live within the context of a watershed or a water system, and we are fragmenting those systems by using dams, over-allocating the water. Some of our lakes and tributaries and streams run dry most of the year, so we're using too much of it, we're cutting it off, but we're also polluting what's left. We're removing important buffer systems and wetlands that can filter water as it flows towards the ocean. And so by fragmenting those systems, what we're doing is we're harming our communities because we're making it more difficult for us to have the water we need, where we need it, when we need it. And the water that we have is increasingly unfit for drinking, swimming, or fishing. And if we're able to fix those two things by looking at the issues in our own backyards, in our own communities, and everybody starts looking at it, then I think we'll have a real chance at changing the outcome of where we're headed. You know, we have 270-something golf courses in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the middle of the desert. We are using the scarce resources that we have as if they were infinite. And that, I think, comes from this myth of abundance, that we have been able to solve the water distribution problem with technology and infrastructure. So when we turn on the tap, water comes out, it's fit to drink in most places. And you know, that seems to have created this attitude that, you know, water is abundant, and even if it becomes scarce, we can use technology to fix the problem. We can overcome anything with infrastructure and innovation. And the truth is, it's simply not true. The Potomac is our nation's river. It's how people used to access the capital. It's got a very storied past, and it's a beautiful, beautiful river system. But it is having some difficulties. The most free-flowing of the eastern United States' large rivers, the Potomac truly is our nation's river. Yet despite its wild beauty, this river was not so long ago declared a national disgrace. And today, the Potomac barely sits on the edge of recovery. I took a journey through its mighty rapids and found that sometimes it takes an apparently pristine river to show us that water systems in crisis are all around us. So Stephanie, how is it that such a wild river is flowing through the nation's capital? That seems unlikely.
A lot of people consider the Potomac the wildest urban river, and we're really fortunate on that front. There have been different large dams proposed over the last 60, 70 years, and fortunately, they didn't get built. And we benefit from that because we have a river with a really wild and intact, naturally variable flow regime. People depend on the Potomac River for so many things, to assimilate our wastewater, for irrigation of agriculture, and for our economy in this region. Many people don't even realize it. They get their drinking water from the river. Congress, when they make their coffee in the morning, the water comes from this river. And when President Obama washes his hands, it's this river's water that's providing their basic needs.
But the river doesn't just provide for us. Its health is crucial to the great diversity of species that live in its waters. Chuck Fox made it his mission to protect the Chesapeake Bay from a growing dead zone and successfully engineered a legislative ban on phosphate detergents upstream.
The Chesapeake Bay is our nation's largest estuary. This is where the fresh water of the Potomac meets the salt water of the ocean. And it's an incredibly productive environment for all kinds of ocean critters. But it's very, very fragile. It's a very shallow body of water that drains an entire watershed that includes everything from coal mines and mountains that we have and spectacular rock cliffs to very flat plains that we use for much of our agriculture.
So how has this watershed changed over the past 100 years?
The population in this area of the country has grown very significantly. We have had phenomenons of suburban sprawl. Imagine when it rains on our suburban shopping malls, all of the pollution that's associated with automobiles or pets all washes into the rivers. But I think agriculture is it's our biggest problem here in the Chesapeake Bay, and it requires a lot of concerted effort to work with farmers throughout the watershed. We all want to have working lands. We want farms. Farms are part of our future. They're our food source. But at the same time, they are right now causing the disproportionate amount of the pollution to the Chesapeake Bay, as well as to waters throughout our country. This is our real challenge going forward today. It's controlling the runoff from the land, pollution from farm fields and pesticides and fertilizers, or from our city streets.
The problem in the 70s was that we were dumping waste into the river. We solved that with the Clean Water Act, which was a brilliant, wonderful, incredible piece of legislation that really cleaned up our waters nationally. But today we have a different set of problems, and I think we need to not only protect the Clean Water Act, but perhaps even add some clauses to it, because we have 80,000 chemicals, many of which are untested, that are flowing into the river. We have more agriculture, more towns, more communities on this system demanding more of their share of water. And so the water treatment facilities aren't designed to treat anything other than human waste. Everything else that we're pouring down our drains, that are running off our streets, aren't getting treated and are going straight into the river.
You ready? Yes, sir. Here we go. Nobody has a right to pollute our waters in a way that diminishes anybody else's use. We have to focus on taking care of the commons, what belongs to everybody.
Potomac Riverkeeper Ed Merrifield is a true advocate for the river system, stopping at nothing to coordinate anti-pollution efforts on behalf of the watershed. His challenge is far from over.
One of the things that separates us from other organizations is when it comes to stopping illegal pollution, we won't back down if we know we're right. So whatever that might be, sometimes it's been we found tons of lead in one stream.
The sign this side of the tree, that brown sign?
Unfortunately, we don't have a separate system where all the sewage goes into the wastewater treatment plants and another system where the rainwater just gets dumped into the river. We have only one system and it all goes into the sewage treatment plants. It sounds good until it rains and it overpowers the sewage treatment plants, and that means about 2 to 3 billion gallons of water filled with raw sewage enters the Potomac every year. Most of the problems with this river, though, are problems you can't see. We found in 2003 we had some large fish kills up in the upper Potomac and in the Shenandoah for the next couple of years. And the scientists that were looking into it, they discovered that the male fish were having issues. 80 to 100% of them were having issues of ovaries in their testes in the male fish, a condition called intersex. The main scientist who works on this believes it's because of the soup of endocrine disruptors and emerging contaminants that are in our water that we can't see that are causing these kind of problems.
Well, we're a very chemical society, and the kinds of water treatment we give at water treatment plants now usually don't take those chemicals out. And so as we flush them down the toilet, as we flush them down the drain, as sunscreens and antidepressants and birth control pills get released into the environment, we expose fish and wildlife and us to potential harm.
We have this conversation going on right now about, do we keep the EPA, do we lose the EPA? Do we keep the Clean Water Act, do we gut the Clean Water Act and turn it over to the states? Where I think we're falling down is that we haven't shaped the conversation around what this water crisis is and how we need to solve it. We need the government to be involved. We need industry to be involved. We need municipalities to be involved. And there are some that are doing that and others who aren't. But most of all, we need to be involved. And we need to demand that our children have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink.
There are so many individual choices that people make and that we make as a society of how we use the land, what we put on the land, what we put into our own bodies, that ultimately makes its way back to the river.
The good news is there's lots of solutions to solve the runoff pollution problem. We can install what we call rain barrels at our homes. We can reduce the amount of fertilizers that we use on our lawns and reduce the runoff from that. And then there's all kinds of techniques that farmers can do. They can install buffer strips along the streams so that the water filters through trees or through tall grass before it gets into the waterways.
The health of our rivers and streams is really the only way we're going to be sure of getting safe drinking water, and it's really our health since we are mostly water. People in this area are mostly Potomac River.
That's the kind of connection we often don't feel. You know, we've become so disconnected from water. It appears in our faucets and comes out of our plumbing systems as if it comes from nowhere. But in fact, it's finite. It's been cycling for thousands and thousands of years through the trees and through the landscape. And now it's in me. Well, that's a connection.
Despite decades of political and scientific warnings, most of us still see a glistening river. Yet the Potomac watershed is on the edge. Once the tipping point is passed, who knows if it can recover? We have a choice to save our watersheds from the worst damages of development, and we can affect change. The urban landscape, the farming landscape, and the wild landscape are all part of the same water system. And it takes all of us to ensure it endures into our future.
Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.